"I designed that building," Joyce said, her voice low but clear, the mop in her hand dripping onto the polished marble floor like a metronome counting down to something none of them were ready for. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. 10 architects in tailored suits turned as one, mouths parted slightly, faces unreadable. Someone near the back let out an awkward laugh, thinking maybe she was joking. But Joyce didn't flinch. Her uniform was wrinkled from a long shift, her gloves tucked into her waistband, and in her other hand, she held a rolled-up sketch, a raw, coffee-stained blueprint with edges worn from being unspooled and reworked again and again during nights no one else had seen. At the head of the table, Damon Prescott, the firm's new CEO, looked at her like she'd materialized out of thin air. One sharp blink. "You?" he asked. The word wasn't cruel, just stunned. And then nothing. No one moved. No one spoke. The air was thick with disbelief. A janitor claiming authorship of the design that had just silenced an entire boardroom of elite architects. The room, for the first time that morning, was frozen not by numbers, not by projections or revisions, but by something raw, impossible, and completely unplanned. At T. Callister and Rowe, the offices gleamed like a cathedral of glass and concrete. The ceilings were high, the hallways quiet, and the walls lined with clean, modern renderings of buildings that touched the clouds. This was the beating heart of New York's elite architecture scene, where visionaries designed monuments and careers were built on ambition sharpened like a blade. And in the shadows of it all moved Joyce Miller, a black janitor, mop in hand, badge without a title. She worked the night shift, pushing her cart down polished corridors after the last executive had gone home, her footsteps silent, her presence unacknowledged. Joyce moved with precision. Every surface she cleaned, every light switch she wiped down, was done with quiet purpose. But her eyes told a different story. They lingered too long on the architectural models encased in glass. She paused in front of the display wall featuring award-winning designs, studying the geometry, the balance, the choices. When no one was around, she'd sit in the break room with a pencil and scrap paper, sketching fragments of structures, tracing imagined skylines in the margins of abandoned meeting notes. At her locker, hidden beneath bottles of disinfectant and old gloves, she kept a battered notebook filled with floor plans and designs no one had ever seen. No one spoke to her beyond a polite nod. Executives passed by without meeting her eyes. Interns, eager and caffeinated, typed away in her presence like she wasn't there. She knew the names of every employee. None of them knew hers. She was part of the architecture, a fixture of the night like the exit signs or the vending machines, necessary but unnoticed. But home was different. In her small Bronx apartment, creativity bloomed in quiet defiance. The living room doubled as a workshop. Blueprints were taped to the walls, taped and retaped. Foam models sat on milk crates beside stacks of architecture books, some decades old, others borrowed from the public library. Her tools were simple but worn from use. And beside it all, on a shelf above her drafting board, was a framed photo of a teenage girl. Bright eyes, wide smile. Joyce would touch the frame gently before sitting down to sketch. The silence at home wasn't emptiness. It was memory. And under all of it, unspoken but heavy, was something she didn't let herself think about too long. Something she hadn't named aloud in years. Joyce sat alone in the break room, her uniform damp from wiping down the executive floor, steam from her tea curling upward like smoke from an extinguished flame. Her sketch pad was open in front of her, edges frayed, graphite smudges marking weeks of quiet work no one had asked for. She glanced at the page she'd drawn the night before, a sweeping atrium with light pouring through a vaulted ceiling, and for a moment, her fingers hovered over the pencil like they didn't belong to her. She could almost hear Lauren's voice in her head, curious and stubborn. But if nobody knows, does it even count? She had smiled when her daughter asked that years ago, over a pile of Legos and tracing paper. Joyce had crouched beside her and answered without thinking, not knowing those words would come back to her again and again. You don't stop being something just because no one sees it. Back then, it was meant to encourage a child's imagination. Now, it lived inside her like a quiet defiance. Hidden genius wasn't dead genius. It was waiting, held back not by lack of skill, but by silence, by grief, by being dismissed before she even had the chance to speak. The tension in the Callister and Rowe boardroom was more than corporate, it was existential. Rumors had been circling for weeks. The firm, once an untouchable titan in the world of luxury architecture, was slipping. 2 major contracts had fallen through. Clients were leaving. Their most recent designs had been called uninspired by a major industry magazine. No one said the word obsolete out loud, but it hung in the air like smoke. So when Damon Prescott was announced as the new CEO, the silence that followed his name was louder than any applause might have been. He wasn't from Callister. He wasn't even an architect. He was a business mind, MIT finance, ex-military, private equity, and his reputation preceded him. Prescott was known for entering firms like a surgeon with a scalpel and cutting out anything that didn't serve the mission. Some said he was a genius. Others used words like ruthless. Either way, everyone understood the same thing. He was here to fix things, or burn them down. His first official meeting didn't start with pleasantries. No slideshow, no welcome message. Just a long conference table full of the firm's senior architects, partners, project leads, and a tray of untouched coffee. Prescott stepped to the front, a large flat folder under one arm. His suit was crisp, his eyes unreadable. "Let's skip the introductions," he said. "I've gone through your current project pipeline. 70% of it is safe, predictable, legacy-based, which would be fine if we were trying to maintain a museum. But we're not. We're trying to matter." He laid the folder down and opened it with deliberate care. Inside was a single design, intricate, sweeping, impossibly bold. A structure that fused geometry and movement, light and space. It didn't just look like a building, it looked like a question mark aimed at the future. The kind of thing clients didn't even know they wanted until they saw it. Prescott turned the design to face the room. "This came from the intern submission bin," he said. "Anonymous. No name, no department. Which tells me one of two things. Either someone here doesn't know how to follow protocol, or someone doesn't want to be found." No one moved. He walked down the length of the table, gaze moving from face to face. "This design? It's the only one that doesn't bore me to death. It's the only one that challenges form instead of copying it. So I'll ask once, who made this?" The silence was thick. A few people exchanged confused glances. Someone shifted in their seat. Another cleared their throat, then said, "Could have been one of the summer interns." "Which one?" "Don't know. Maybe it got misfiled." Prescott stared at the table. "We're not moving forward until I get a name." From the back of the room, a soft voice broke the stillness. "It was me." Heads turned. Confused expressions gave way to disbelief as the speaker stepped forward. Joyce Miller stood in her janitor's uniform, mop in one hand, her work gloves tucked into the waistband of her navy slacks. Her posture was steady. Her voice didn't tremble. "I designed that building," she said again, louder this time. "That's my work." Someone laughed. A quiet, incredulous sound. One of the senior designers looked at Prescott as if to say, "This is a joke, right?" Prescott didn't laugh. He narrowed his eyes, searching her face. "You?" Joyce nodded once. A full 10 seconds passed where no one said a word. She wasn't supposed to speak in these rooms. She wasn't supposed to be in them at all. But here she was, mop dripping quietly on the floor, claiming ownership of the most impressive design the firm had seen in years. And the room froze, caught between disbelief and something else entirely. Something none of them had the vocabulary for. Awe. Time didn't just slow, it warped. In the stillness after Joyce's words, the room seemed to bend under the weight of disbelief. The architects exchanged glances like they were trying to confirm they'd all heard the same thing. Confused frowns turned into raised eyebrows. Someone near the end of the table let out a soft, dismissive chuckle. "She's the janitor," a voice finally said, not loudly, but sharp enough to cut through the air. The words landed like a slap, matter-of-fact, brutal, and full of the kind of certainty that only comes from never having been challenged. Joyce didn't move. She didn't shrink, didn't explain. She simply looked ahead, waiting. Damon Prescott was still staring at her. His expression didn't change. No smile, no smirk. Just that same piercing gaze, scanning her like an unfinished equation. "What's your name?" he asked. "Joyce Miller." He nodded slowly. "Joyce, walk me through it." "The design." "No," he said. "The idea. Where it came from. Why it's yours." She hesitated, not from fear, but from the weight of having to speak after so long being silent. "I clean these offices at night," she began. "I see the models on the drafting tables, the revisions left behind, the meetings written on whiteboards. I read the margins of things people throw away. I've seen what this firm values, what it repeats, and what it ignores. The way natural light is treated as an afterthought. The way community access is boxed into corners. The way public space is always a sacrifice, never a priority. I started thinking about what would happen if the design wasn't just about impact, but about invitation. Somewhere near the front, an older architect shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Others were now staring at her blueprint on the table, seeing it differently. Damon didn't look away. "You have more?" Joyce nodded. "Yes, at home. Go get it. I have some with me." She reached into the tote bag she always carried, hidden behind the cleaning cart, and pulled out a worn folder. Inside were sketch after sketch, layered elevations, perspective renderings, shadow studies, spatial annotations scribbled in pencil and ink. Not polished, but sharp, intuitive, daring. She placed them on the table without ceremony. The same hands that scrubbed countertops now laying out visions no one had dared put forward in that room. Damon didn't rush. He studied the pages, flipping through them silently, his brow furrowed not with doubt, but deep concentration. Around the table, the architects watched him, then the pages, then Joyce. "This one," he said, pointing at a fluid atrium design. "How'd you solve the weight distribution without killing natural flow?" "Double-curved support beams hidden inside the green wall," Joyce answered. "The vertical garden absorbs and diffuses light while concealing the load-bearing structure." He looked up at her. "Stay." A murmur went through the room. "I want her in on the Boston project," Damon said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Effective immediately." No one argued. They didn't know how. The janitor had spoken, and the building they'd all admired suddenly had a face. Joyce said nothing else. She just nodded and began gathering her sketches. Not as if she were afraid of losing them, but like someone finally being allowed to show the world what she never stopped being. Joyce's official title was design assistant, a label as careful as it was condescending. The firm issued her a temporary badge, gave her a seat near the back of the bullpen, far from the partners, not quite with the interns. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood. This wasn't a promotion. It was damage control, a PR move to buy the firm good press and quiet down any whispers of bias. Let the janitor sit in for a few weeks, they thought, let her burn out, and the rest will take care of itself. But Joyce didn't burn out. She built in. Her first week was met with a stiff kind of politeness. Some coworkers offered cautious smiles, others kept their eyes down. A few were openly annoyed. One project lead forgot to forward her meeting invites. Another accidentally left her name off an email chain, twice. But she took the slights like she'd taken everything else for years, quietly, without reaction. Instead, she poured herself into the work. The Boston Innovation Center was in early concept development. There were pages of mood boards, material studies, structural guidelines, but no heartbeat. The design was technically sound, but flat. It lacked story, purpose. Joyce saw it immediately. She stayed late every night, not as a custodian this time, but as a creator. She revisited models, made sketches on tracing paper over the firm's CAD drafts, mapped out how the building could breathe, how it could serve the people who'd move through it instead of towering over them. She approached the project like it was personal because for her it was. Damon Prescott didn't offer praise. He barely offered conversation, but he noticed. He began forwarding her client briefs, asking for her thoughts in margin notes. He never addressed her background, never commented on her past. He simply demanded results, and when she delivered, he kept the work coming. Cold, yes, but honest. Some of the younger staff started asking her quiet questions. "How'd you think of this atrium angle? What program did you model this on?" When they realized she wasn't only smart but generous with her time, curiosity spread. Interns started sitting next to her during lunch. One day, someone placed a copy of her sketch on the whiteboard. No one erased it. Of course, the resentment didn't vanish. One senior architect, Marcus Reed, made no effort to hide his disdain. "The boardroom isn't a redemption arc," he muttered once, just loud enough for her to hear. But Joyce had faced sharper words than that, and much heavier silences. She let it pass. Gradually, her presence became part of the rhythm of the firm. She still wore practical clothes, no heels, no tailored dresses, but her hands now carried graphite, not bleach. Her desk filled with models and mock-ups. Her email signature changed. Late-night hours bled into early morning meetings. And somewhere in that blur of quiet effort, People stopped referring to her as the janitor behind her back. They started calling her what she was becoming again, an architect. For the first time in years, Joyce felt the familiar hum return, that low, persistent thrum beneath her ribs, the one that used to guide her when she was just starting out. It wasn't confidence, exactly. It was something older, deeper, like remembering her own name after forgetting it for too long. She was in, not fully accepted, not yet safe, but inside the walls of power now, and quietly laying the foundation for something none of them were ready for. Joyce rarely talked about her daughter, not because she didn't want to, but because saying Lauren's name out loud still felt like touching a bruise that never healed. It wasn't a secret, exactly, just something kept close, like a note folded too many times, creased at the corners, worn soft from being opened and closed in silence. The photo sat on her desk now, tucked behind a model of the Boston Innovation Center's revised atrium. A girl with big curls, a defiant chin, and eyes that carried too much mischief for her age. Lauren, 16 when she died, 17 that fall if she'd made it. Joyce had left it all behind after that day, her job, her name in the design world, the awards, everything, because none of it mattered anymore. Back then, Joyce had been at the peak of her career. She'd just been nominated for a National Design Award, youngest black woman to make the shortlist, they told her. She was scheduled to speak at the ceremony, a 10-minute keynote about innovation and accessibility in public architecture. Lauren had been proud, had begged to come along. "I want to see you on stage," she'd said. "I want to see what it looks like when a black woman takes up space." They were running late that night. Joyce had been nervously rewriting her speech, pacing the living room, while Lauren ran back to get something she forgot. Her camera, Joyce thought later, though she could never confirm. The car that hit her came out of nowhere. A drunk driver, too fast through an intersection that needed a stoplight. The details didn't matter. They never helped. Joyce didn't go to the ceremony. She didn't write her speech. She stopped designing. First, it was temporary. Then it became survival. The sight of a blueprint made her chest ache. Her drafting table sat untouched for months. People called, then stopped calling. The offers dried up. So she let her license expire, sold her home studio, and took a job with a cleaning agency. Quiet, invisible work. Something that didn't ask her to dream. But Lauren had said something before she left that evening, tossing her coat over her shoulder, half a joke and half a dare. "Design something that changes everything, Mom." Joyce remembered that line the way you remember songs you didn't realize you'd memorized. It echoed during her first nights at Callister and Rowe, when she'd find herself staring too long at the renderings on the walls. It surfaced when she sketched without meaning to, when her fingers moved on their own. She never intended to return to the work, but somehow her hands hadn't forgotten the promise, even if her heart had. Now, in meetings, when someone asked her what inspired a particular curve or material choice, she found herself thinking about Lauren. The way her daughter used to sit at the kitchen table, reorganizing the spice rack like it was a city grid, or designing cardboard skyscrapers for her Barbies. The way she'd flip through Joyce's architectural magazines and say, "You could have done better. With love, always with love." Joyce had never stopped being an architect, but she'd stopped believing that the world needed her voice. It was Lauren who had believed that, who had insisted it wasn't enough to just design something beautiful. It had to mean something. It had to change something. And now, walking back into a world that had once shut its doors on her, Joyce felt that promise waking up again. Not just to create, but to rebuild. To redesign the system that had excluded her and so many others like her. Every blueprint she touched now wasn't just work. It was legacy. It was Lauren, still speaking through her mother's hands. Quietly, without saying it aloud, Joyce had started building toward that promise again. And this time, she wouldn't stop. The mood inside Callister and Rowe shifted slowly, like a tide turning beneath the surface. Joyce was no longer just the anomaly everyone whispered about. She was becoming a name people said with respect. Her fingerprints began showing up across multiple projects. The difference wasn't just aesthetic, it was functional, human. She had a way of looking at a building not as a monument but as a living space. Clients noticed. They used words like warmth, intuition, and soul, terms the firm hadn't heard in a long time. One of her proposals, a community-integrated atrium with hybrid-use zones for public and private interaction, was so well received that Damon called her into his office and offered her the trial lead on the Boston Innovation Center. The The project was high-stakes, high-profile, and highly political. It had been on hold for months, stalled by uninspired designs and corporate indecision. "Make it breathe," Damon had said. That was the only directive he gave. No congratulations, no hand-holding, just a test. Joyce took it seriously. She threw herself into the work, organizing small breakout groups with interns and junior staff, inviting unheard voices to the table. She ran late-night feedback sessions with people from the Boston community, teachers, street vendors, artists, asking what they needed from a public building. Her sketches reflected their input. Her renderings had child height counters, green roof spaces for food gardens, wide, welcoming ground floors with more glass and less steel. But not everyone was on board. Marcus Reed, a senior architect with 20 years at the firm and a resume lined with government contracts, had quietly expected to be given the Boston project himself. He didn't hide his irritation. When Joyce tried to coordinate with his team on structural integration, emails were mysteriously lost. Requests for model updates were delayed. One of her original drafts, an open-air collaboration space surrounded by vertical gardens, somehow showed up in his presentation for a different client. Slightly altered, but unmistakably hers. Joyce didn't confront him. She didn't yell or accuse. She just kept working, doubling down, sharpening her designs, tracking every submission, and documenting everything. She refused to give Marcus the chaos he was hoping for. Quiet persistence became her weapon. She started gaining unlikely allies. The interns, initially unsure how to approach her, gravitated toward her leadership. She taught them more in 2 weeks than their supervisors had in months. She didn't gatekeep. She didn't speak in buzzwords. She shared knowledge like someone who believed talent could come from anywhere. And it wasn't just the staff noticing. Clients from the Boston project began requesting her in meetings. City officials asked follow-up questions about her people-first vision. One community rep even called her design the first thing that's made us feel seen. Marcus pushed back harder after that, trying to paint her ideas as idealistic and not grounded in code. But Joyce had done her homework. She came into every meeting with not just designs, but research, compliance references, and projected costs. She wasn't just designing from the heart, she was backing it with data. And Damon? He remained distant, watching everything from his glass office like a hawk. He didn't intervene, didn't defend her. But he saw the momentum building. And more importantly, he saw the firm leaning towards something it hadn't known it was missing. Joyce was no longer proving she could belong. She was proving that the firm, for all its polish and pedigree, had been incomplete without her. And while the tension still simmered under the surface, there was no denying what was happening. Joyce Miller was rising, and the foundations around her were beginning to shift. The day of the Boston Innovation Center's preliminary unveiling was electric. The boardroom was packed, not just with the firm's top brass, but with city officials, journalists, and key clients. Joyce sat quietly near the front, her sketches and models spread out on the table before her. As the presentation rolled out, her vision unfolded on the large screens. Open spaces alive with greenery, light-filled halls designed for connection, and a building that didn't just sit in the city, it invited the city inside. Applause followed. The concept was a hit. Praise poured in. Articles ran with headlines like, "From Janitor to Visionary," and "The Architect Who Changed Everything." Joyce's name was everywhere, but not for the reasons she hoped. The media framed her story as a fairy tale, rags to riches, overcoming odds, a feel-good narrative about an invisible woman suddenly seen. The depth of her work, the complexity of her ideas, were reduced to sound bites and cliches. She sat with Damon afterward, watching a glowing profile on her play across a laptop screen. He looked pleased, maybe even satisfied. "That angle gets people talking," Damon said, eyes sharp but calm. "It sells the firm, the project. You." Joyce's jaw tightened. "So, I'm a story," she said flatly. "Not an architect." He shrugged, almost casually. "It's marketing. You knew how it worked when you signed on." She looked at him then, something hard and fierce rising in her chest. "If all you want is a story, Damon, I'll give you a new one, but it won't look like anything you've seen before." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Joyce folded her arms. "Because this isn't about me. It's about everyone like me. Invisible talent, overlooked ideas, voices shut out by systems that refuse to change. You want a headline? Fine. But I want a revolution. not just a feel-good feature. If you want to use me to build something real, not just sell a narrative. Damon didn't smile. He nodded slowly. Challenge accepted. Joyce felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose, sharpened by defiance. The real fight was just beginning. The tension inside Callister and Rowe thickened like fog, suffocating and silent. Marcus Reed, bitter and cornered, wasn't about to let Joyce's rise continue unchecked. Late one night, a set of blueprints appeared in the firm's shared digital folder, drawings laced with critical structural errors, dangerous flaws that would cost millions to fix. They were signed with Joyce's name. The accusation was a bombshell. The project was put on hold. The board demanded answers. Damon found himself in the impossible position of having to choose between protecting Joyce or protecting the firm's reputation. The whispers began again, low and venomous. She never belonged here. She's a risk. Even some of the younger staff wavered, unsure what to believe. Joyce felt the walls closing in. The work she'd poured everything into was slipping through her fingers. The betrayal stung, not just from Marcus, but from a system that seemed ready to erase her again. Her phone buzzed with anonymous messages. Her emails were ignored. Invitations to meetings quietly disappeared. For a moment, she thought about walking away, leaving behind the cold stares, the doubts, the endless fight. Maybe invisibility was easier, but she didn't. Instead, she went to the one place that still held her steady, Lauren's grave. She sat on the cold stone bench beside it, the city's distant hum softened by the cemetery's quiet. From her bag, she pulled out Lauren's sketchbook, edges worn, pages filled with bold lines and wild ideas that her daughter had never stopped dreaming. Opening it, Joyce traced the pencil strokes with trembling fingers, feeling the fierce spark of Lauren's youthful creativity. She remembered that promise again. Design something that changes everything. It wasn't just a challenge anymore. It was a lifeline. Sitting there, with the weight of loss and the burden of doubt pressing down, Joyce found a renewed sense of purpose. This fight was bigger than her. It was for Lauren, for every voice silenced, for every talent buried beneath assumptions and prejudice. She closed the sketchbook gently, rising with resolve. The battle ahead would be fierce, but Joyce Miller wasn't invisible anymore. And she wasn't going anywhere. The verdict was swift and brutal. The firm's board, eager to protect their reputation, didn't hesitate to place Joyce on suspension. Officially, it was pending investigation, but the message was clear. The lead architect on the Boston Innovation Center was now a liability. Her access revoked, her email deactivated, and her office cleared out while she was away. Even worse, the Root Project, her passionate initiative to uplift overlooked talent, immigrants, and blue-collar creatives, was quietly killed before it could take flight. The idea was too risky, too disruptive for a firm still scrambling to control the narrative. Meetings once filled with cautious optimism now dismissed the program as a distraction. Joyce's world crumbled fast. The same colleagues who had begun to accept her now whispered in corners, their eyes avoiding hers. The interns who'd sought her out kept their distance. The clients who had championed her designs stopped returning calls. One rainy evening, she found herself standing outside the glass doors of Callister and Rowe, dressed not in her temporary designer badge or the modest clothes she'd worn during meetings, but in the janitor's uniform she had tried so hard to leave behind. The irony wasn't lost on her. The company's doors gleamed behind her, impenetrable, cold, and the weight of shame was heavier than any mop or bucket she had ever carried. The world she'd fought so hard to re-enter now seemed to reject her outright. Invisible again. Forgotten. But as she stared at the reflection in the rain-slicked sidewalk, a quiet voice whispered inside her, a promise she'd made long ago. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Joyce sat alone in a quiet corner of a small coffee shop, the weight of the day pressing down on her like a storm cloud. Her mind raced through everything lost, the project, the Root Project, the fragile hope she'd been building. But then, unexpectedly, an intern from the firm approached her. Young, nervous, eyes bright with something Joyce hadn't seen in a long time, belief. "You don't know how much you've inspired me," he said quietly. "Before you, I thought my background meant I'd always be stuck in the shadows. But you made me believe I could be more than where I started." His words stirred something deep inside her, a flicker of the promise Lauren had made her years ago. That voice, so full of life, so certain in its dreams, echoed in her memory. "Design something that changes everything, Mom." Joyce realized then that she didn't need the firm's permission. She didn't need their approval or their acceptance. What mattered was her own vision, her own drive. The work, the change. It wasn't about titles or offices. It was about building something real, something lasting. She stood up, steady now, her purpose clear. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, she would do it on her own terms. Days after her quiet resolve, Joyce's phone rang. It was Damon. His voice was clipped but honest. The investigation was complete. The sabotage was real. Marcus Reed had orchestrated the false blueprints to undermine her. The firm owed her an apology. "I want you back," Damon said. "Not just to finish the Boston Innovation Center, but to lead the Root project. Your project. Your terms." Joyce listened carefully. This was more than a second chance. It was a chance to reshape everything. She laid out her conditions clearly. Full creative control, the authority to hire and mentor undiscovered talent, and a commitment to deep community involvement in every project. No more token gestures or sidelining. This was about real change. Damon hesitated only a moment before agreeing. The firm, hungry for redemption and success, saw the value. More importantly, Damon recognized the power in giving Joyce the reins. Joyce returned to Callister and Rowe, not as the invisible janitor or the reluctant architect, but as a visionary leader. The Root project was born, an incubator for voices long silenced, a platform for designs rooted in humanity and justice. This was her moment, not just to build buildings, but to build a new future. The day the Boston Innovation Center opened was electric with anticipation. The sleek glass and green terraces stood as a testament, not just to cutting-edge design, but to the power of inclusion. Inside, spaces hummed with life. Murals by immigrant artists adorned the walls, community gardens thrived on rooftop terraces, and every corner echoed the voices of those often left unheard. Joyce walked through the crowds, surrounded by architects, city officials, and families whose lives the building was meant to serve. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward. Reporters clamored to hear the story behind the design, the woman who had gone from janitor to lead architect. When asked how she made the impossible journey, Joyce's eyes held steady. "I never stopped being an architect," she said simply. "You just never looked at me." Her words rippled through the crowd, cutting through the applause and celebration. She dedicated the building to her daughter, Lauren, her voice cracking but filled with fierce love and hope. "This is for you, Lauren. For every dream you dared to dream, and every dream still waiting to be seen." At the entrance, a plaque caught the light. "To the dreamers no one saw coming." The Boston Innovation Center wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of redemption, of justice, of what happens when hidden genius is finally given space to grow. Joyce had not only reclaimed her place, she had transformed the world around her. And in doing so, she had honored the promise she made long ago, to build something worthy of her daughter's dreams. Joyce stood in the same boardroom where silence had once greeted her words. But now, she held a blueprint, not a mop, crisp and bold in her hands. Around her, architects, executives, and community leaders leaned in, eyes fixed on her every word. The room no longer ignored her. It hung on her vision. The invisible woman was gone. In her place stood a leader, confident, seen, unstoppable. The blueprint she held wasn't just paper. It was the future she had fought to build, and finally, the world was ready to listen.